It is my great honor to be present here before you and to also present what inspires my research. So for those of you who are wondering what in the world inner sustainability means, actually, Olli-Pekka has made my life a lot easier by already throwing out the buzzwords: mindfulness, attention, awareness of what others are doing. These are all components of inner sustainability. And this favorite quote of mine actually very well summarizes the relationship between inner and outer sustainability. So the quality of our life, which is the outer sustainability, which is often measured by measurable aspects, such as the Human Development Index and so forth, is closely linked to the state of our minds. And interestingly, soon after I came to Helsinki, which is located in Finland, considered one of the happiest countries in the world, I came across this news item while sitting in Hanken's cafeteria, that Finland's mental health crisis helpline gets a record number of calls. And looking deeper into it, we see that actually even sitting here in the happiest country of the world, we do recognize that unless the mind is happy, what is outside doesn't really matter. This is where we see the connection between inner and outer sustainability. What research is showing now is that positive mental health, or inner sustainability, is very closely linked to ethical decision-making and also to innovation. And this is linked to outer sustainability. So what exactly do I mean by that? When we talk about outer sustainability in my research, we're talking about things like climate stability, we're talking about biodiversity conservation, we're talking about justice. But when we talk about inner sustainability, we're talking about aspects that come from positive mental health, such as awareness, ethical clarity, and even expanded worldviews, what we were talking about right now, about attention, willingness to listen. So unless there is an inner sustainability, an inner calm, there would be no possibility of being open to listening to other perspectives. So what happens now if we have a combination of awareness, ethical clarity, expanded worldviews? What we notice is that our observation of phenomenon, as well as the interpretation of what we observe, changes. And as soon as we talk about observation and interpretation, we're talking about shaping action. And when action shapes planetary outcomes, immediately we see that there is a connection between the inner world and the outer world. Now, how does this all link up with the research that I'm doing? I'd like to start with what can be called the sustainability paradox. Today, we see advanced technologies such as drones, satellites, remote sensing. All of these advanced technologies are monitoring our planet and all of its transformations in real time. We also see that artificial intelligence is supporting these technologies and modeling everything that makes the outer world sustainable. And yet, we see that ecological degradation is continuing at an enormous and unprecedented scale. Why is that the case? Albert Einstein famously said that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And what we see here is therefore not the problem of a lack of innovation, but what we see is that the innovation is happening within disciplinary silos. And this is where the inner sustainability aspect of connection, of listening, is not happening, at least not optimally so. And here I'd like to come up, here I'd like to share a very interesting experience I had recently. I was preparing a huge international consortium for an EU Horizon project worth 6 million euros. And the call was about finding agroecological methods of managing weeds. Not the smoking weed, please. It's the weeds on the farms. How can we use less of weedicide and chemicals to manage the farm so that we have more healthy output? Now, I brought together, hopefully very mindfully, very many experts. Two of these experts, one of them was from the field of remote sensing, and the other one was, of course, from the field of agroecology. Now, our remote sensing scientist gave an extremely impressive and extensive presentation about a specific weed. Doesn't look like a weed, right? But it's a weed called datura. It is considered one of the most deadly, horrible weeds when we look at it from the perspective of conventional agriculture. So the remote sensing scientists very nicely summarized that datura is one of the most widespread and dangerous weeds. Drone-based remote sensing technologies that they have developed help monitor the fields and identify and eliminate datura from the fields early on, and use of weedicide to remove datura from fields as early as possible so that you can use less weedicide. Then the agroecologists had the chance to speak, and they were really unhappy. They said, why do you want to eliminate datura? We like datura. Because it turns out that datura offers several benefits in agroecological farming. It also need not be eliminated. In fact, it needs only to be managed so that datura, which acts as a natural weedicide, prevents the onset of more harmful weeds and more harmful insects. So here we see, therefore, that a transformation in the inner world of the observer, that willingness to listen to what other disciplines have to say, is very important and is key to bringing about a transformation in the observed outer world. This is very interesting for me coming from India, because actually in the ancient texts of India, this relationship between the inner and outer worlds is defined as the relationship between the seer and the scenery, or the observer and the observed. The ancient sages have said in texts like the Bhagavad Gita that mental preconditioning influences perception, observation, and even expression. And discernment, what is known as viveka, that is the ability to distinguish between right and wrong, good and bad, ethics, as well as inner calm, vairagya, are essential prerequisites for expanding our understanding. They've also said to follow a very practical eightfold path to relieve one of narrow, limited preconceptions that limit our ability to expand our horizon of knowledge. It's therefore interesting, actually, within my ERC project, we notice that in India, where they are working also towards expanding agroecology, they don't start with only teaching the farmers how to convert to agroecology. They also start with giving them workshops that influence their inner world. They do mindfulness, they do breathing workshops that allow the farmers to open up their minds, to be open to change before the change can actually be implemented. Now, this is where it gets more interesting. Recently, I came across the phenomenon called observer effect. How many of you have heard of this? Very nice, that makes my life easier. This is very fascinating because the observer effect came up in the beginning in the 1800s when Thomas Young conducted the famous double slit experiment, where he showed that light does not show only particle-like properties, but actually wave-like properties. So his double slit experiment actually debunked the major notion of the time that light behaves only like a particle. So what happened is that when light goes through two different slits, it actually, the waves interfere with one another, creating alternating dark and light patterns. And therefore, he debunked, if it were a particle, it would have gone through straight, and there would be two clear lines of light. Now, what's more interesting is that later iterations of this experiment showed that if the scientists inserted a device to measure or observe which slit the light was going through, suddenly the light no more showed wave-like activities. Suddenly you had two clear straight lines of light. Based on this understanding, if you look, if I can go back once, so this phenomenon of observation making the light waves stop being waves and suddenly start being particles is known as wave function collapse. So what's fascinating is that there's different theories that have come up around this. Some theories say that, okay, wave function collapse happens on observation. Other more interesting theories say that there is a concept called many worlds. That means observation doesn't collapse the wave function, but reduces the number of options to the option that is best suited to the observer. So using the language of quantum physics, if you were to go back to the weeds situation, currently, if you look at a satellite image, and through the satellite image, you're looking at weeds, there are many, many possible worlds. Weeds are good, weeds are bad, weeds are good and bad, weeds are neither good nor bad. There is an infinite set of possibilities. But as soon as an observer is placed in the equation, suddenly there's a collapse of the different possibilities into one specific outcome, which corresponds with the worldview of the observer. So, is the observer truly neutral? Based on the research done on light by scientists like Thomas Young, we had scientists like Werner Heisenberg actually mirroring what was said by the ancient texts long ago. He said, what we observe is not nature itself, but rather nature exposed to our specific method of questioning. He said, the observer impacts what is observed and how it is interpreted. Observation is therefore not neutral, it is theory-laden. We also see that perception is shaped by memory, by conditioning, by epistemic limitations. We also see that ethical orientation influences interpretation. So finally, science is not value neutral. It is very much linked to the observer's mindsets. So the future depends on who is observing. What is observed is shaped by the observer's individual mental conditioning and state of consciousness. When a different observer observes the same phenomena, the outcome, actions, recommendations, and policies may be different. Therefore, when we talk about bridging inner and outer sustainability, we notice that if you take care of the inner dimension, then the outer impact is better. If you take care of the ethical intention, of the intention being ethical, there is more responsible innovation. When there is awareness of bias, there are better policy designs. When there is discernment, the ability to distinguish between good and bad, there is more integrated and equitable sustainability. And when there is a detachment from the end outcome, you are more likely to have freedom from narrow, often economic fixations. So intentional inner practices are very important. They need to be integrated into education systems and to policy to ensure that there's a balance and a true interconnection between inner and outer sustainability. Thank you.